Welcome to What's Happening at the Quick, the podcast that brings you the latest on all things art and culture at the Regina Quick Center for the Arts. I'm your host, Dr. Rachel Harris, Executive Director of the Quick Center. Today, we are thrilled to have Steven Melendez, Artistic Director of the New York Theatre Ballet, joining us. Steven has an incredible journey in the ballet, from humble beginnings in a New York City homeless shelter to his role as an artistic director with the New York Theatre Ballet. Steven Melendez, welcome to the show. You've had such an incredible journey in ballet. I'd love to start with your early experiences. You begin your ballet training while living in a New York City homeless shelter. Could you tell us a little bit about what it was like discovering ballet in those circumstances? And how did dance help you at that time in your life?
Thank you for having me here. You have such a good radio voice.
Thank you.
It's like that. It's an interesting thing. I've been asked a lot to speak about my beginnings into dance. And I realized more and more as I kept trying to figure out what I would say to that question, that for me, normal was normal. And there's no way for a person to know what isn't normal. I was growing up in a shelter. We didn't have a whole lot. Of course, I couldn't have friends over. I didn't have birthday parties, things like that. But it was also very mundane. My mother did a really great job of protecting me from the reality of a life spent in that kind of environment. She put me into ballet, of course, and some other programs. And I made my way, almost oblivious to the reality of life because I didn't know any other way. When I was 7 years old, Diana Beyer, who was the founding artistic director of New York Theatre Ballet and the LIFT program, came into the shelter, and she announced that any of the children who wanted to study ballet could follow her. And I didn't particularly want to do that because, I was a Hispanic boy from the South Bronx, and that just wasn't really part of my culture. And my mother, I think, was the one who had the foresight to recognize that that was better than me being out in the street on my own, or in the shelter alone, where I wasn't even allowed to be. And so I was put into the ballet classes. And it was a year later that I was put on the stage in the Nutcracker, as most young dancers have for their first performance ever. I had the role of Little Mouse #2. And my costume was as wide as it was tall. And I went out after the performance and I took a bow, and I was so incredibly overcome by the idea that all of these audience people, 1,000 audience members, were applauding and cheering for me. And I realize now as an adult the value of that moment. Of course, in the moment, all I knew is that I really liked the feeling of people clapping for me. But as an adult now, looking back, I realized that when you're homeless, especially in New York City or any major city, let's say LA or Washington, D.C. or somewhere, people generally pretend that you are invisible. I mean, they step over you on the street, if you make eye contact with them or they ask you for money, you avoid your gaze, you literally pretend that they're invisible. And then to suddenly be on stage, center stage, under the lights, and have 1,000 people clapping and cheering for me was like whiplash to the other side. And that, as an adult person, of course, I can look back. When I was 7 years old, I had no idea all this psychology was happening in the back of my head. But as an adult person looking back, I realized that actually is the value for me of a life spent in the dance studio. It gave me an opportunity to be seen.
It also sounds like your mother had a major influence in your life at that time. Can you talk a little bit more about her?
Yeah, I think any young Hispanic boy knows that the mother is mother and father and Jesus and everything, right? I mean, you don't argue with your mother, and it's just the way it goes. So, yes, my mother was an incredible woman, and she was it sounds weird to say because, we lived in a shelter, but she was quite a successful woman, actually. I mean, she was a medical researcher at Mount Sinai Hospital. And that just goes to show that, there are some stereotypes about homelessness that I think that a lot of people don't understand in America.
For sure.
But, she was a single mother, and we lost our house unexpectedly. And the reality is, especially now in New York City, are you kidding? The rent is too damn high. There was a political party called "The Rent is Too Damn High." Imagine,
Yes.
for all the listeners, really just imagine what would happen if right now, today, you were kicked out of your home. Do you have the money, the cash in the bank necessary to have at least 2 nights in a hotel with your family, with your kids, before you move into the couch with a family member? If you have a family member in the city you're in, maybe your family is far, far away, like mine was. And then, do you have first month's deposit and last month's security and the cost of the moving truck? Do you have all of that just sitting in the bank right now? And can you afford to take time off of work to make all of that happen? And then you have to re-enroll your kids in a new school that they're zoned into wherever you end up moving. If you don't have all that money in the bank right now, guess what? You are home insecure, like so many people in America are. So this is the reality of my life. And the moment that ballet came into it, it's not right to say that it rescued me or saved me or anything like that, but it certainly was a lifeline. It was a door that opened that my mother had enough foresight to push me through. Really pushed me. I mean, kicking and screaming against my will, she pushed me through the door.
That's wonderful. So for everyone that's listening locally, what are these New York City prices? It's much higher than we would imagine.
Oh my gosh, are you kidding? Yeah, I can't even. I like to keep things that are sort of always relevant, but the reality is, I think it's impossible to talk about New York City real estate without being immediately out of date with the information. I mean, by the last thing I looked at, a 1-bedroom apartment, which by New York standards really means like 600 square feet. It's most people's the size of the front garden or something.
Yes.
We're talking about $3,000 a month.
My
maybe
goodness.
$3,500 a month.
Wow.
And they call that a 1-bedroom. So you can imagine, the bedroom is the minimum legal size to be called a bedroom. It's New York City, of course.
Let's talk about you as a young dancer. You trained at the School of American Ballet and attended summer programs at places like San Francisco Ballet Academy and Houston Ballet Academy. What was the transition like from being more of a scholarship student in New York to attending these prestigious programs across the country? And was there a particular mentor or moment in those years that stands out in helping you shape your career?
I think every young dancer has lots of teachers that come through their early development that impart their stamp, they give their bit of wisdom. In the dance world, perhaps one of my most influential teachers, beside Diana, who of course was my first teacher ever, was actually here in New York. His name was David Howard. He's quite a well-known teacher of dance in New York City. He's passed on now many years ago, but he worked with really some of the greatest dancers of the 1900s. And he was an older man when I met him. And he and I would go for dinner or for lunch, and we would just talk about his history with dance and all of the dancers that he'd worked with and all of the places he'd been, all the stages he'd seen. And when I was young, speaking with him, it was like the equivalent of somebody telling you a fairy tale. In a fairy tale, they tell you about princes and princesses and monsters and demons and all of these fantastical ideas that you go, there's no way any of this is true. Yet what he was talking about was absolutely true. He was talking about traveling around the world with these dancers that were more famous than, I don't know, who's a Taylor Swift or something, nowadays. And I couldn't even fathom that. I couldn't imagine. I mean, I was so impressed to be in front of an audience of 1,000 people. And there are theaters in the world that seat 5,000, say 10,000 even if you're in an arena. And that was such an otherworldly concept for me, the way he opened my eyes to what could be. Another teacher was, he's going to love that I say this, I haven't talked to him in 20 years, but Claudio Munoz at Houston Ballet Academy. I was there for the summer program, and in an effort to get me to jump higher, he threw a chair across the room at me.
Oh my goodness.
And, it sounds horrible, but it stuck with me, and I jump higher now. It wasn't violent. It was just a thing that happened. Ben Stevenson down in Houston Ballet, he made me take ballet class standing on top of a grand piano.
Wow.
And his note to me was that now I would be on the music.
Ah,
So yeah, there's tons of stories of all kinds of incredibly famous and important people in the ballet world that were very meaningful to me. People not in the ballet world, actually. There's a man who I've spoken about him in public only a couple of times, but perhaps one of the most influential men in my life when I was coming up. His name was Rick Bard. He ran a magazine, a Manhattan Bride magazine, in Manhattan, and previously he was in the Navy, where he won the Golden Gloves, the boxing championship. Before that, he graduated from, I think, from MIT, and his degree is in rocket science. He has a diploma on his wall that says rocket science on it. And as far as I was concerned, coming up, I didn't have a father growing up, and so my mother was amazing, but she was a woman. It was a different thing. I'm a young boy, and I needed a male role model. And Rick was kind of a real male role model for me. He showed me that it was possible to be successful in business and be able to hold your own in a boxing ring and have an advanced degree in a very incredibly complicated science. And he sort of checked all the boxes for being the perfect male role model. And I spent a lot of evenings with him. Also, not particularly talking about anything important, just having that influence in my life, which I think set my course in a particular direction from a very young age.
That sounds profound, very poignant. You joined the New York Theatre Ballet as an apprentice in 2001 and became a principal dancer in 2006, performing in works by major choreographers like Balanchine, Ashton, and DeMille. Could you share what it was like performing those roles at such a young age? Were there particular performances that were especially meaningful to you?
I feel like there are a lot of performances in my life that I can relive every single second of right here, right now, if I close my eyes. A lot of them are because really horrible things happened, but that's sort of the way it is in live theater. Times when I fell or I dropped a partner, oh my gosh. Or times, on stages that were really miserable, one light working overhead and no sound system or something. But the thing that I think is most important about the experiences that I had at such a young age that I think have shaped me to today and have given me the mission that I'm on now is all of the time that I spent in the dance studio with generations of dancers and ballet masters and coaches and directors and choreographers who had and have so much more experience and knowledge and information than I could even have thought one person could have when I was that age. Working on those masterworks by these master choreographers gives a dancer, a young dancer, a real perspective on how the legacy and the lineage of classical dance has been passed on through an oral tradition from choreographer to dancer, and then ultimately from dancer to dancer, and so on and so on. And along the way, each person leaves their mark on the work. And the work of a dancer now, today, reviving or recovering or recreating or restaging those masterworks is equally that of archaeologists trying to get at what it originally was, and that of independent, creative thinking, artistic individual trying to figure out where and how and when you can put your mark on the work in service of what the work actually is, not in an egotistical way, but in a way that says, I was here, I did this. I really was very lucky at New York Theatre Ballet to have access to such a deep, rich bench of repertoire. I think it's true to say, and I will continue to say it to anybody that asks, that New York Theatre Ballet has the most diverse repertoire of any company in America. I think that's true. You can fact check me if you want. But it's really, really unusual to find in one institution work that spans time in the way NYTB's work does. We do works from the late 1800s all the way to works that we just premiered a work this weekend, a brand new piece. And that spans genres. This is really the critical part. We do works that originated on Broadway. We do works that originated in, I'll put this in quotes, although you can't see my hands here, downtown New York. That was a whole genre era of dance, the downtown dance scene. We do works that originated at major stages in the UK and in New York City. Works with sneakers, works with point shoes, works barefoot, all kinds of things. And very few companies today have that kind of versatility in their repertoire.
How exciting. In 2006, you performed as a guest soloist with Ballet Concerto in Buenos Aires, and later joined the Vanamuna Theatre Ballet Company in Estonia. What drew you to international dance companies, and how did these experiences abroad influence your artistic perspective?
There's two parts to this answer. What drew me to international dance companies is a little bit selfish, actually. As we talked about, I started my dance training in a homeless shelter as part of an outreach program. And I realized very soon that almost every single piece of press that I ever received as a young dancer felt the need to include that I had come from this outreach program. And so when I took the contract in South America, I think what I was actually doing was running away from that story. I was trying to define myself as a dancer, a successful, hopefully successful dancer, outside of this niche novelty that I happened to come from this outreach program. And in South America and in Europe and around the world where I've performed and lived for very, very many years, I never told anybody about that background. It didn't seem relevant. I wanted to stand on my own 2 feet as a dancer. This way, I knew if the good press or the bad press, I mean, sometimes it's bad, that's fine, was about me and what I was doing and not me where I came from. I wanted to be known as a good dancer, not a good homeless dancer, So that was the thing about seeking international work. The other part of it, though, is a little bit what I was saying about my time with David Howard. The other part of it was recognizing that dance and ballet especially really is an international language. You can go into any ballet class across the entire planet, and it doesn't matter if you speak the language or if you know anybody there. Every ballet class is the same. You will start with pliés, then you'll move to tendu, and then you'll go to jeté, and then rond de jambe like this. And at the end, when you get to the big jumping or the big turning across the floor, it doesn't matter if you ever met any of the dancers in that room before. If you do a good job, they will support you. And if you do a bad job, they will support you, because that's what dancers do. Mm-hmm. So I appreciated the idea that I had an extended network of family all around the world in this sort of subculture of classical ballet. Going down to South America was the first opportunity for that. And that company down there actually was a touring company. They toured around the world. Really, I can't say with enough superlatives how many places and how many performances we did in every conceivable country on the planet. And then I moved to Estonia, which a lot of people don't even know where that is on the map. It's very, very far north. It's about as far east as you can get before you get to Russia. It's right on the border of Russia. And when I was going there, I thought to myself how wonderful it would be to study classical ballet so close to Russia, where classical ballet really is a very important element of the culture and the society that has advanced the technique of classical ballet for hundreds of years. So I was really lucky to have that experience.
During this time, you also performed extensively in festivals and galas worldwide, including places like New Zealand, Thailand, Italy. Performing in so many diverse cultures must have been enriching. So I'm curious, did you find that audiences in different countries responded to ballet in unique ways?
That's interesting. Yeah, I suppose international audiences respond. I don't know that they respond necessarily to ballet in unique ways, but I think they respond more generally to the concept of art in unique ways. And here's maybe one anecdote that highlights that. In the United States, it's really, really, really typical for me to introduce myself to someone and they say, "Hi, I'm so and so. Who are you?" And I say, "Hi, I'm Steven." And the first question out of their mouth is, "What do you do?" As if
Exactly.
somehow we are defined by our profession.
Exactly.
And then I say, "Oh, I'm a dancer, or I'm an artist, or I'm a performer." And the very next question they ask is, "Oh, that's great, but what's your job?" And I
Mm.
always found that to be subtly, not so subtly, insulting. But also, the reason why not so subtly is because actually what it results in is a little bit of pity from me for them, that they don't maybe understand the value of art in society or the place that it holds as a fundamental element of a civilization. I mean, if we look back in time, there are some archetypes that are part of any civilization. Of course, there's always in every civilization some version of a politician or a leader or a king or a deity of some kind. And then you have some version of a medical person, a shaman, a witch doctor, whatever that is. You have some version of a laborer, of course, the farmhand, the carpenter, whatever. You have an archetype of the mother or the housekeeper or the home person who manages these things. And then always in every major civilization I think that has ever existed, there is the archetype of the artist. Sometimes the artist / philosopher. Sometimes those two things are different. Nonetheless, the artist is a critical part of a society. And over generations, eons, over the change in time, the thing that's left of most major civilizations is the art. Whether it's paintings or if it's music or if it's sculptures or if it's buildings, it's the art. Nobody's looking back at the ancient Roman times or the time of Mansa Musa or the time of Genghis Khan trying to figure out who the wealthiest person was, right?
Mm-hmm.
Looking back to see who the artists were. So this is a really critical difference with the international perspective of the place of ballet or art generally and the American perspective. And so traveling around the world, it was always interesting to feel like I had a kind of respect from society in general that I always had a hard time finding in the US.
After returning to New York in 2010, you continued performing with the New York Theatre Ballet and worked on new pieces with choreographers like Sir Richard Alston, Pam Tonowitz, and Niccolo Fonte. How did collaborating with these choreographers influence your growth as a dancer? And did you find yourself exploring new aspects of your artistry through their work?
Yes, absolutely. I think the choreographer of that list certainly that has had the greatest influence on my work in the later half of my performing career was Sir Richard Alston. In fact, when I was working with him, he wasn't yet knighted; he was just Richard. And it's been really fun now that he's Sir Richard. He and I made a piece together. Well, he made a piece. I was the dancer. I just want to be clear about that. He made a piece called A Rugged Flourish. And he came to New York. He's British. He came to New York. And before he started working on it, he and I went out for a lunch. And he had learned that my mother had recently passed away just in a couple of months before that. We were about to embark on this choreographic process for which he would have to move to New York for a couple of weeks to set the piece and then go away. So he only had a limited amount of time. And what he asked me was if he thought that I was ready to undertake being part of a creative process for a new piece, given the significant emotional situation that I was going through with the death of my mother. And in a very perverse, I don't know what, I hadn't even thought that could possibly be a problem.
Mm-hmm.
My mother died, and I thought, okay, I got to go back to work. Let's do it. Let's just keep going. And it took him actually taking me by the shoulders and going, "Hey, wait a minute. Are you sure you're okay?" for me
Yes.
to actually process that something important had just happened and that the work that I embark on is creative. And if my creative spirit is not ready, then the work is not actually going to be very good. It's going to suffer, or well, maybe not suffer, but it's going to be influenced, let's say, by what
Yes.
happens, on the stage. Um, and so I worked with him on that piece. It was very successful. In fact, it got me onto I think it was the front page of the arts section of the New York Times. And I've been told by a photographer at the Times, I don't know that this is true, but she told me that there's a particular moment in that ballet where I leap over 6 ladies, and they're all standing behind, and I leap straight over their heads. And that moment has been photographed and printed in the New York Times, that same moment from the same ballet, many, many, many times since the premiere. And she thought that maybe it was one of the most printed moments of any ballet in the Times. I don't know if that's true. That's what she said.
That's
I like to think
incredible.
that's true.
So I'm curious though, did you find it influence you in a good way? Did you find a deeper meaning in your work as you dealt with the death of your mom?
I think yes. I think I started to understand better something that I didn't understand when I was so young, tackling all of those other major choreographies. I started to understand how a dancer imparts a little bit of themselves on the characters. Up until that moment, I'd never suffered a death like that in my family, certainly. And I hadn't been married. I didn't have kids. I mean, I look back and I think, what kind of life was I living? Actually, it was the ballet studio and the ballet stage. Every now and again, I'd be on an airplane or in a hotel. I didn't really have much of a personal story beyond the professional work.
Mm-hmm.
So after speaking with Richard, I realized that I need to cultivate and curate myself in order to become the artist that I was aspiring to become. And I think if you look back at some of the choreography that I made at that time and the other pieces that I was a part of creating at that time, there's a really sharp turn toward dramatic works that require a different kind of humanity to them. Another piece that I performed for the first time around then was Jose Limon's Mors Pavon, which is essentially the story of Othello. And portraying the role of Othello, you've got to be in rage of Desdemona for cheating on you, and absolutely run red with jealousy, and in order to portray those things. Another piece that I did with Nicola Fonte was a piece that was based loosely on the story of Hansel and Gretel, which sounds like a children's story, but actually there's a witch involved, and
Yes.
manipulation by the father, and there's some deep undertones in there. So I started to tackle these other kinds of more dramatic roles, I guess you could say, and that was all coming from my understanding of how the individual can insert themselves into the creative work.
In 2015, you celebrated your 15th season with the New York Theatre Ballet, which is an incredible milestone. During that time, you also began creating your own choreography. I'm very interested in about your piece, Song Before Spring, and what that creative process was like for you.
Song Before Spring was an incredibly enriching creative process. It was a piece made in collaboration with a dancer from American Ballet Theater, who herself was, I think at that time, an emerging choreographer. She was still very young in her choreographing career. Her name is ZJ Fang. She's an incredible dancer. She's still with ABT now, I think. And she's made many choreographies since then. And she and I were sort of paired together like a blind date almost by the director. And the director put us together and said, "Hey, you guys, I want you to make something together. Oh, and by the way, you have to use this music," which is really an unusual way to commission a new work. The music was Philip Glass. It was the first 10 piano etudes, which are very famous, of course.
Yes.
Except with a twist. We did not perform them to piano. We performed them to a steel drum ensemble. Now, when I say steel drum, if you're thinking calypso music, you're exactly right. those steel drums,
Yes.
except they were playing Philip Glass. And it was sort of a cacophony of noise in the background, but the sort of rhythmic structure of Glass's music was there. And I thought, at least after an hour of listening to this, it kind of put you in this hypnotic trance state. ZJ and I, of course, had many coffees and discussions about how we would share the responsibility of choreographing this piece. And ultimately, we landed on trying to divide the 10 etudes amongst the two of us. But in practice, we were kind of in the studio together often. And she would do something and I would do something, and we edit each other's work. And it was really, really interesting. I don't know that the piece is particularly narrative, but there's certainly an undercurrent of a series of interpersonal relationships between the 8 dancers on the stage. And over the course of an hour, you see these relationships unfold in ways that just when you think you understand who's who and what they think about who else is on stage, the idea disappears. And so you start questioning yourself as an audience member, is that really what's happening, or am I imagining that? And I think that's kind of the magic of the piece. But I'm biased. I'm the choreographer. Of course, I love it. I think everybody should love it.
Of course. So now, as artistic director of the New York Theatre Ballet, you're responsible for shaping the company's vision, the entire vision. What are some of your goals for the company? And I'm curious again, how does your own journey influence your leadership and the kinds of stories you want to bring to the audiences?
There's a whole lot that I've said about the mission of New York Theatre Ballet now that I'm at the helm. I'll state actually the most important part of our mission, and then I'll speak very briefly about it. But if you want to really get into the details, I'm happy to be here all night.
All night.
Is full. The important part of the mission is to build a love for dance and diverse audiences for the future. That's one sentence, but it really encompasses a lot of stuff. Coming from my own background, I realize that the only reason that I am where I am today is because when I was a young boy, I had access to dance. And then from there, dance did the rest. Dance is something worth falling in love with. If you have access to it, I'm confident that anybody who sees good dance and has the dance presented to them in a way that's digestible and understandable and accessible, they're going to fall in love with it too. I have no question about that. The question is, how do we get it to the people? I think for too long, especially classical ballet, has been stuck in a sort of ivory tower. It's in the big proscenium stages with the big chandeliers and the red carpets, and the ticket prices are $180 or more. And you have to go to, Lincoln Center or the Kennedy Center or the Seagram Art Center or the Detroit Opera House. There's only so many of these major institutions across the country. And the truth is that unless you grew up as a dancer or with some kind of dance training or some kind of dance background, it's very unlikely that you actually even understand what's happening. The technique is kind of obscure. Who knows the difference between a good pirouette or a bad pirouette? Unless you're a dancer, then you know the difference. Hell, I'd question how many people who aren't dancers even know what a pirouette is. So I guess those are those cookies, right, with the chocolate inside?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. So this is the problem, that classical ballet is inaccessible. And so in order to build a love for dance, we have to first make dance accessible to everybody. Then we will build the love for dance. The second part of that sentence about building diverse audiences for the future is, I think, a subtle and nuanced distinction from what I think a lot of arts institutions are already trying to do. I think that the future of dance in America lies in its sustainability financially. Right now, dance is dying because audiences are dying. Theater is dying because audiences are dying. Because I don't think that young generations have the cultural instinct to go to live theater. I think that's unfortunately a sort of uniquely older generation concept. And, young people are distracted by Netflix and Instagram and TikTok and all that stuff. They got other stuff going on. The world is falling to shit. I get it. There's a lot of stuff going on.
Yes.
And going to the theater to spend 2 hours to watch some ballerinas dance on their toes, abstractly, it sounds like a strange choice when there are so many bigger things going on. But I think that actually in the detail is where the value is. Taking 2 hours of your life to go watch ballerinas dance on their toes will help provide clarity on how to navigate our increasingly complex world. So I want to build audiences for the future. And distinctly, I want to build diverse audiences for the future. Because again, for too long, the traditional audiences have been particularly wealthy and particularly white in America. There's nothing wrong with that, but we have to have more than that. And I think that if we don't have a diverse audience base, then we will continue to regurgitate the same stories on the stage, the stories that reflect and are relevant to the audience in attendance. And if that audience in attendance is not very diverse, the stories won't be very, very diverse. So it's sort of a circle situation here. All of these things will yield inclusion of diverse voices, both on the stage, in the administrative suite of the arts institutions, and then consequently, we will have diverse audiences. The diverse audiences will be new audiences, which means that we'll have sustainable audiences over time. And with sustainable audiences over time, we will create change in the world that I think will be for the better of humanity, certainly in America. So what was the question?
Well, you're leading us right into the next part of the question about diversity and inclusion efforts and the challenges of it, and what changes you would like to see in the industry to make ballet more accessible and inclusive. And I think that's the key that we all face, whether it's music or symphonies, or how do we pull the audiences in to perceive something that is so valuable. I quite often try to tell the world that classical music might not be your jam, but you have to see it live before you can make that decision. So you are saying everything that we are feeling here. So all of the challenges, definitely what we face as artists in this world.
I think that something a lot of people don't understand is that what we're trying to do, the change we're trying to make, is something that takes time. And few people are willing to give the time necessary to see the results of the change they're working toward. In a very sort of black and white way, here's a conversation I have really, really often now in my role as director of New York Theatre Ballet. New York Theatre Ballet is a touring company. We perform in New York City 3 or 4 times a year. And then for all of the rest of the months of the year, we try to go out on the road and we bring dance to towns across the country. Very, very often, I have conversations with booking agents or directors of theaters or regional arts councils, or name your person who is in charge of a venue, a theater, a space. And the conversation goes something like this. Hi, my name is Steven. I'm the director of New York Theatre Ballet. We'd like to do a performance in your theater. Will you hire us? And they say, no, there's no reason to hire you here because our community doesn't like ballet. And then I say, when was the last time you had ballet there? And they say, we've never had ballet here. And I go, well, then how do you know they don't like ballet?
Precisely.
You see the circle here, right?
Yes.
Or then they go, okay, fine, we'll take a chance on you. You'll do one show on a Monday night that also happens to be Christmas, let's say. Nobody will come because of all of the competing interests and because it's the only time on the planet, right? And then they'll say, you see, nobody bought the ticket, so we're not going to have you back next year. And my argument is, no, this takes time. We have to build the audience. We come once, the people leave, they go, oh my God, that was so great. They tell their friends, and then we come back and they bring their friends, and then we come back a year later, then they bring more friends. And eventually over time, we will have built the audience. We will have built the need for classical dance in that space. And I'm not saying this hypothetically. New York Theatre Ballet has done this. This is what we do all across the country. We build audiences for dance in towns and cities across America.
And it's interesting that, as an artist, what you talk about taking the time to develop and to develop your craft and to develop your technique. And part of that for me is quite sad, because there's a moment when everything starts to come together and you just start flowing and you become one with the music. It comes off the page and you're not just performing, it's indescribable. And it's very sad to me when someone has taken just a few lessons on the piano, or because once you finally get it, it's one of the most joyous things that you could possibly do.
Yeah, absolutely. There's something very meditative about dedicating yourself to art, whether it's music or dance or sculpture or drawing or painting or whatever.
Exactly. So this next part is very exciting. Your life story was recently featured in the documentary Lift, which has received awards and an Emmy nomination. So how was it seeing your journey on the screen? Did watching the documentary give you any new insights on your own path in dance?
I've recently started realizing this. I was talking about this earlier, actually, with you. I explained how the reason why I moved out of the country so young was because I was running away from my background. I wanted to stand on my own 2 feet as an artist without the luggage of my story behind me. And when the documentary, which took 10 years to film, by the way.
My goodness.
When the documentary was first in the early stages of filming and the film crew was following me around, I really didn't understand it. As I said, normal for me was normal. I didn't understand why anyone would want to highlight this in a film. I didn't think anybody would watch the film. And then once I realized, okay, people will watch the film because it's in a movie theater and you just buy a ticket to whatever's showing, I wondered what any of it mattered. I mean, okay, so people are going to watch it, but what are they going to get out of it? You know? And only now, after the film has been out and I've been seeing the reactions of audiences, am I realizing that I was looking at the whole situation the wrong way. I was looking at it from my perspective. I wasn't going to get anything out of it because I already lived it. And because I'd already lived it, it was normal. It didn't seem important. But now that I'm having conversations with audience members who have no idea what it means to be homeless in America and no idea what it means to be a ballet dancer, you put these two things together and the overlapping black hole of knowledge is massive. That actually the film stands as a testament, as a chronicle, as a sort of an explanation for the world of what the value of arts education is for young people, and certainly what the value of arts education for young people who are approaching life from deficit can be. So I put aside my own sort of misgivings or my own embarrassment for hearing myself speak or watching myself on the camera or whatever, for the greater good, I think, of the people, the young people particularly, although often it's parents or sometimes other arts administrators. And in the best case scenario, please give me an auditorium filled with very wealthy people and politicians who can make policy about this. And we change hearts and minds. We explain the way the world should be for these folk.
It sounds like you've come almost full circle from being a student to being a mentor. And so through the LIFT program, what do you hope this can achieve for young dancers today that are facing the same challenges?
I think representation matters. I think young dancers, young people, you don't have to be a dancer, any young person needs to be able to see what they're aiming toward. And if I can be one of the lighthouses along the coast of their journey, I would be very happy for that. And my hope, like any good mentor or teacher or parent, would be that the people coming behind me far surpass whatever little bit that I've achieved.
So I noticed that you speak very eloquently with a dynamic range of adjectives and powerful ability to make your thoughts understood. And your passion for dance is so clear and beautiful. And most importantly, well thought out. It fills me with a sense of awe, maybe wonder to be able to see the world of dance as you do. And I'm really impressed by your idealism, bringing to mind the words of George Bernard Shaw. You see things and you say, why? but I dream things that never were, and I say, why not? Reflecting on this entire journey from those early days in New York to becoming a director, teacher, mentor, what would you say to young dancers in their lives? Are there any particular lessons you want to share about resilience and the role of the arts in overcoming adversity?
Yeah, I would caution young dancers from getting caught up or hung up on the product. They should instead focus, they should instead focus themselves on the process. The process of arriving to the stage, the process of arriving to the audition, the process of arriving into a company, all of the work that they put in, the time, the dedication, the energy, the sometimes tears, rarely blood, always sweat, are actually the things that are building their character and their mettle and their resilience for whatever will come. And ultimately, all of those character traits will be ones that they can take with them, even outside of the dance world. Because the reality is that whether you're flipping a burger at McDonald's or cutting somebody's heart open to fix their aorta, you have to have a work ethic and a responsibility, a self-responsibility and a discipline that dance can teach you, that dance can instill in you as a habit, as a second nature. And so, if the young person is instead concerning themselves with the product of the performance, if they put all of that weight, the pressure of the one show that they get to achieve or to excel, I fear that they're actually missing the forest for the trees, if that makes sense.
Yes.
And I think, unfortunately, I think society today, especially for young people, there are lots of competing interests and all kinds of things that are fighting for their attention. And all of those things, at least the ones that I've seen, appear to have the same theme in common, which is that instant gratification is best. And when you are developing as a human, that is rarely the easy answer is rarely the right answer. So I would encourage young people to redefine the word work for themselves, and then to pursue excellence through process in everything they do.
Steven, thank you so much for sharing your story with us today. It's been inspiring to hear about your journey and the vision you have for the future of ballet. We look forward to seeing all that you continue to accomplish with the New York Theatre Ballet. And for those of you who are inspired by Steven's story, we're excited to announce a series of masterclasses led by the New York Theatre Ballet on Saturday, November 16th. The 10 a.m. class is for our community and our St. Bonaventure University faculty and staff. We're sort of calling it a come as you are class. Bring whatever you're comfortable wearing and let's just move and learn some ballet. The noon class we are dedicating to our local dance studios and our dance teachers who continue to inspire dance in our young students in our community. And at 2 p.m. for St. Bonaventure students, please come out and learn from these masters. Any walk of life, athletes, come on over. Dance teams, come on over. Any student is welcome at this class at 2 p.m. Don't miss this chance to connect with the world of ballet right here on campus. Their performance on November 17th at 3 p.m. features Stravinsky's Firebird, which is an incredible piece of music, and I cannot wait to see it. Also, your favorites from the Nutcracker. Can you give us a little bit of what your new piece is about that you are bringing on the second half? Oh my goodness, I am not remembering the title.
I think it's Minetta Creek.
Yes, that's it.
Yeah, Minetta Creek is a very, very cool piece of choreography. It's a piece that New York Theatre Ballet commissioned, and it premiered last season. So until now, a very small number of people have ever actually seen it because it is brand new. So the folk in St. Bonaventure will be part of an elite group to have seen this ballet before it gets out into the world too far. It's choreographed by Gabriel Lamb. Gabriel is an incredible choreographer here in New York City. She has her own company, and she's been choreographing for a very long time. And her movement style is sort of her own vocabulary of movement. If you have an idea in your head of what classical ballet is, this is not that. So I'll just put that out there. The music for the piece is composed and played by Pauline Kim Harris. Pauline is a Grammy-winning composer, and working with her and working with Gabriel on this new work was really an incredible opportunity to see two masters honing their craft. The dancers, what to say about the dancers? They look great in the piece. It's really fantastic. The piece itself is about, maybe this will help people. The piece itself is based on a creek, a body of water on Manhattan Island in New York City that has a really spooky legacy. It is a body of water that has since been paved over and built upon many, many, many times. And at some point during that period, in the late 1800s or maybe the 1900s, tenement houses were built on this body of water. And there are some stories about the creek flooding the basements of these tenement houses with black water in times of great peril in the community. And even going back further into the 15 or 14 or 1300s, when the native people were living on Manhattan Island, they had some spooky stories about the creek and a snake that inhabited the water that would do evil things and the spirits and all of these kinds of things. So it's a great piece. It's really neat. It's a little bit spooky. It's very cool. And the creative team is really first class.
Well, we cannot wait to see you, to meet you, talk with you, and watch these wonderful performances and dancers. Thank you so much, Steven, for our talk today. And thank you all for listening to our podcast, What's Happening at the Quick.